Learn application development using .NET Core. In this topic, I'm going to explain about how we need to update scaffolded code to improve the performance even much better than automatically generated scaffolded code. Welcome to Clouds.Training. This is Divakar. If you have already subscribed to my channel, thanks a lot. If you haven't subscribed, please request you to subscribe for more updates and training programs. A quick recap of what we have learned so far. We have created a project called Core SEO from the default MVC template, and in the models folder we have added a class called content.cs which holds database entities to store title, description, keyword. And then we have created a database context file for entity framework. Once this is done, we have created a controller called contents controller and generated the views for CRUD operations. This is done using a technique called scaffolding. And then we have enabled migrations using entity framework migrations and updated the database. In this topic, we will fine-tune the code generated using scaffolding for the contents controller. To improve the performance, open contents controller and put a breakpoint for the details method. So if you are new to programming, a breakpoint is helpful for you to debug the application. Run the application. So instead of running Control F5, this time hit F5. It might take a moment to load for the first time because it is running in a debug mode. Once it is loaded, click on the contents. Here, if you remember, we have the breakpoint here in the details method. So click details and the breakpoint is hit. We can see the ID returned here is 3 because I have created few records and deleted, so the sequence is updated to 3. Hit F10. Here we have a variable which holds the contents. So based on the context, we are using first or default async method to get value by ID and storing it into content variable. And if the content is available, we are returning content to the view here, or we are returning not found exception. If you notice here, there is a concept called asynchronous programming is applied. So this is an asynchronous method. Whenever asynchronous method is there, we have to await for the content. Now let's go to view, and when we return this content to the view, what is happening in the view? Let us examine that. So what I have done is I have right clicked here and click on go to view. Also you can open this views folder and click on details. It will open the view for you. The first thing to notice here is @model, and it is the namespace of the content model. So for this view, this content is available, and here in the HTML, this is a syntax for displaying the title and its value. So go to contents controller, hit F5. It will display the details of the record that we have selected here. Back to the list. Stop debugging. By now you might have understood the purpose of index and details method. So index method is to fetch all the records and display in a page, in a list or grid format. And details is when we select a particular record, based on the ID passed here, it is fetching one single record. If it is there, it is going to fetch the record. If not, it is going to return null. This is not a big performance problem when it comes to development. However, this index method is having a performance issue. At this point, we have only one record in the database, which is fine. There won't be any issue. However, if the application grows and it has thousands and billions of records, then the page will be too heavy and it is going to take a lot of time to load this page, and sometimes there is a chance to crash this application. So to overcome that, we can introduce paging. And second point is, by default, entity framework will try to keep track of its entity state changes. Since this is just a read-only operation, in this case we can introduce something called as no tracking. This will improve the performance and it will tell the entity framework that don't keep track of the entities. It is only read-only operation. So this way it is going to improve the performance for the read-only operations. The HTTP post methods are used for create and edit. And for these two methods, there is a special attribute called validate anti-forgery token. This is for create as well as edit. The validate anti-forgery token attribute helps prevent cross-site request forgery attacks, which is also called CSRF attacks. The token is automatically injected into the view by a form tag helper, and it includes when the form is submitted by the user, so that it will protect from anti-forgery attacks. For this create action, content is an input parameter of content type. In this method, a model state is validated. If it is valid, then only record is saved. Once it is saved successfully, it is returning the index view. Let's go to the view. This view contains a form tag with action as create, and there is a submit button to post this form, and it contains all the input elements. Let's run the application. This is the application, and this title tag is this title label ASP4. This title is nothing but this title, and this is the input, and this is the input tag. So now scroll down, you can see that there is a create button. When we hit this button, it is actually submitting the form. This is nothing but the same button. So the question here is, whatever the values that we key in here are available to the controller bind method. How this is happening? There is a concept called modal binding. So this modal binding refers to ASP.NET Core MVC functionality that makes it easy for you to work with data submitted by the form. So a modal binder converts this form and posted values to a CLR types and pass them to the action method in parameters. So this is all taken care by modal binder. Here if you observe the parameters, it has ID, title, description, keyword and published date. But we don't need the ID here because ID is automatically generated and it is a primary key. Let's run the application and try to create one record. And the record is created successfully. So it still works. Our change has no impact on anything. This code works perfectly in ideal conditions. What if the user fills the form and before hit submit button, the connection to the database is disconnected or the database is down and user hits the submit button? So it is going to throw an exception. We need to handle those exceptions gracefully. For that, we can use try catch blocks. An easy way to introduce a try catch block is right click, snippets, surround with try. Just type try and hit enter. So it is going to surround the code block with try and catch. We don't want to throw the exception, but we want to log the exception to the console. We can log the exception here to the database, or we can show a user-friendly error message page to the end user. Now let us understand how we can update the edit method generated by default. The code generated by the scaffolder for the edit has added bind attribute and generated modal binder default entity, which is not a recommended way to implement this approach. This can result in overposting. The recommended HTTP post approach is to read and update. So we're going to update the code according to that. To compare the signatures, I'll just comment this and copy and update it back. So I'll remove the default binder properties and int to nullable int. Let's delete this code. Here we have another method with the same signature here. So let's rename this to content post. First we need to validate if the ID is null. If it is null, return not found. And then we're going to create one variable to hold the content that needs to be updated. In this variable, we're going to store the value from the database using this ID. For that, we will use single or default async method. If try update model of this content to update is successful, then we're going to pass the parameters that needs to be updated in the database. So here we are actually controlling what needs to be updated. If you remember, for the index method, to prevent entity framework from keeping track of changes, we have added as no tracking. So we're going to make use of this tracking feature and update the entities with the model values here. So now entity framework knows the modified entities and they are controlled here. So in the try catch, we're going to save the changes. Once the changes are successful, we're going to redirect to index action. If it is failed, it is going to fill the form with the same content that we have retrieved from the database. We need to run the application by pressing Ctrl F5. Go to contents, click on edit. Now we will delete this keyword 4 and hit save. So it is updated. It is working fine. So in this way we're going to prevent of overposting. There is an article on overposting here. So if you want, you can navigate to this article and read about overposting attacks. Another point I have forgot to mention is we have renamed this edit to edit content post. We need to copy this and update the ASP action to edit content post. If you forgot to do that, your application will not be updated. We are done with the create and edit methods modifications. Now the only thing pending is delete, and most of the logic for the delete is happening in delete confirmed action. When we look at this code, we straight away notice that there are some exception handling missing here. We can introduce try and catch, and based on the thumb rule, whenever we are doing any operations on the database, first we need to read and then update or read and delete, so that we can read the entity from the database and attach the modified entities or tag it as deleted and then remove that entity. We're going to do that here in this code. First step is to read the entity from the database. For that, we're going to create a variable, await for the action, and remember to introduce as no tracking to improve the performance and get the single or default async. So once we have this, we'll check if it is null. If it is null, redirect to index. If it is not null, we're going to do the delete action. We're going to tag this entity as removed and save the changes. Once the details are saved, redirect to the index action since it is deleted. If you have exception, log it, otherwise return. So we are done with this. Let's run the application. Click on contents, delete and delete. So the record is successfully deleted.